Hello again, fight fans. Michael Montero here. For those of you who have been following my work for a while, you know that I've been doing a lot of reporting, a lot of talking about the issue of drug testing in boxing. It's something that I've really taken an interest in and just dove into with both feet. And I wanted to present a video series here. This is the first of 5 videos from an interview I did recently with Margaret Goodman, the founder of the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, or VADA. We spent an hour or so with her at a horse ranch near her home in Las Vegas, got to meet her horses, got to talk to her and some of her fellow officers at VADA about the ins and outs of what VADA does, what separates them from the pack, and what we can do to make drug testing in boxing better. So here's part 1, where we talk a little bit about Margaret Goodman's background in boxing, how she got started, how she was one of the very few women, female ring doctors in boxing in the entire world, and what that was like, trends that she saw with fighters, concerns that she saw with them with some of the health problems, things that she just saw over her years working with the Nevada State Athletic Commission, her issues and her concerns with the current system, the State Athletic Commission system here in the United States. For those of you who don't know, who might be watching this from overseas, there's a system here where there's not a lot of uniformity. Every state, every jurisdiction kind of does their own thing. So we talk a little bit about that. And then ultimately how horse racing brought her into the world of anti-doping and boxing. So I hope you enjoy this. Again, this is part 1 of our 5 video series with Margaret Goodman. So there were only, when you started getting involved in boxing, there were only a handful of female ring doctors, and really there still is. It's a male-dominated sport. How was that? Was there any battles you had to fight, or
Not so much that. I remember when I went before the commission, and I think I don't know if I write about this in my novel, Death in Vegas, but it was funny because at first they had never had a female ring physician. Obviously at that time they didn't even have a female referee or female inspectors, and we weren't having a lot of women's bouts. And they were concerned. They were concerned because the ring doctor had to collect the urine for the drug testing, and so they were concerned about that. And then I always remember this stupid story that I tell. Don King used to have a lot of fights here in Nevada back then, and he'd have these huge cards with maybe 12 fights on a card.
Those are good days.
Those were good days. And I remember there was a fight in Primm, Nevada, and I was working that fight. Now, when you start off as a ring doctor, typically you do a lot of the work in the back. You're not so much ringside, which is one of my favorite places to be because you're with the fighters in their corners and you experience the win, you experience the loss. But at any rate, there was only one dressing room for each corner. So that meant that 12 fighters were in a dressing room. And I remember I had to go back and collect the urine. And I go back there, and the fighters all spoke Spanish because they were the undercard fighters. And I remember asking the fighter to pee in a cup in Spanish, and immediately all the fighters dropped their pants. So then I figured this is not going to be a problem.
I was going to make a Las Vegas joke, but okay. That is
true story.
True story. There you go.
And then after that, I remember going out and telling the commissioners, and I said, "See," and they went, "Oh, okay, so maybe not so bad." Not shy.
Fighters get used to it, right? It's just one of those things.
It's true, and I don't want to sound sexist, but I really think that in a lot of instances, I'm sure there were fighters that hated me when I worked ringside, but I think a lot of them would talk to me more in the back, and I would be able to find out more what was wrong with them or not, because they would feel like they were confiding in their mother or their sister or whatever. So I would learn more. That's
an interesting angle. So do you think that a lot of the fighters would be more comfortable opening up to you and talking about certain things because you're a female?
I really do. I really do.
That's interesting. You covered over 500 boxing and MMA fights, right, between the 90s and the 2000s. What were the main medical issues that you would say that, or trends you saw in fighters, issues they had, whether it be cutting weight, head trauma, anything like that? Was there anything that stood out to you?
So you mean before the fight happened? What would be, are you saying?
All of it. Damage that these fighters would take, things you'd see in older fighters, problems fighters would have getting in training?
Yeah, I'd see a lot of things. I think some of the things that would stand out to me was a decline in performance which I think was under investigated by commissions, and just the nature of the way boxing is, because it's state regulated, it made it very difficult to help another jurisdiction when your fighter would leave that jurisdiction and then maybe come back a couple years later. Maybe it had some tough fights, maybe it had just aged and looked like they shouldn't be competing any longer. It was a very difficult way to standardize that. So I think so many fighters would stay in the ring way too long, and I think that the responsibility, one of the greatest responsibility a commission has, is to determine licensure, fitness to fight, and it's not in the medical test that the fighter undergoes to really make that determination. So that was a distinct problem that I would see, and it frustrated me to no end. And I think that things have gotten better in a lot of respects, but there's that lack of uniformity where some commissions do absolutely no testing of fighters as the years go by. You know, I mean, if anything that I feel that I did when I was chairman of the medical advisory board for the Nevada State Athletic Commission was we instituted MRI studies.
Right.
And
one of the few commissions to ever do that.
One of the few. I think New York was already doing it. I think that that really made a huge change, and that it kind of brought it all together and what we needed to really concentrate on. You know, not just the number of rounds a fighter had, their age, but how did their MRI look? How was it looking from year to year? And so now I think Nevada is doing a very good job in following that with the Cleveland Clinic in town, or the Louisville Center for Brain Health, in following the fighters through the years with serial neurological exams, neuropsych testing, all those things we wanted to do back then. But I can tell you, I remember when we had our commission meeting about MRI studies, and the promoters, certain individuals from different promotional companies, were arguing that they didn't want us to do them. And their main reason was, well, what do we do if we find something? And I said, exactly. But that was something they didn't want. I mean, I remember one person said, what if Oscar De La Hoya has an abnormal MRI? And I said, well, isn't that the point?
Right.
So, I mean,
but there's so much money at stake. How do you fight that?
It's not easy. It's, you know, week by week, month by month. And I think that things have improved a lot. But you just have to do that. And you know, when I've lectured before the Association of Boxing Commissions, and Dr. Silva was there as well, that, you know, we try to tell them that all these other commissions that do so very little in following a fighter from year to year, or when they license a fighter, that they need to pay attention to these things. And if they can't do them themselves, they need to ask other commissions what those results are, because those things are often not shared. So that if a fighter gets knocked out, there's something called the federal suspension list, and we're talking about the United States. You mark down, you know, this guy had a TKO, and you give him a certain suspension. Right. But when he goes to another state, that state may just see, well, he was knocked out and he had a, you know, 45-day suspension, but they don't know exactly what happened after that. And then the suspension then gets lifted after the 45 days. That guy shows up on your doorstep, and you're like, well, I think he's okay, but do you really know that? You don't know. I mean, any doctor in their office gets all of the medical history to make a determination, and the history is everything. It's not so much in the test. And the problem with a fighter is by the time they start showing changes on their tests, it's too late. It's too late to do anything to help them. Yeah, you can take them out of the line of fire, but they've already incurred
the damage is done.
Exactly.
And we've seen so many times throughout boxing where a named fighter shows so much damage, and they can't get licensed in Nevada, but they'll go to Tennessee or something and get licensed for a fight. We've seen that a million times. Do you think the state commission system is outdated? Do we need one federal commission? Would that help?
I've argued for that for years, and I remember even going with Dr. Romansky when he spoke in front of Congress when McCain was head of that committee, the Commerce Committee, and we argued for that, and it just is unlikely to happen because it's expensive.
Why is that?
Well,
because it was McCain and Reed, right? That was the two.
Reed, don't let me get started on Reed. But
he just talked to talk. He didn't want, okay.
He because he represented Nevada, the commission here, even though they can argue and say they would be happy to have a federal commission, they didn't want it. A lot of the bigger states did not want that because they don't want someone telling them what to do. You know, they don't want someone looking over their shoulder. It's states' rights, you know how that works with a lot of different things.
Right.
You know, we can get into the politics of it, but that was not something that the state of Nevada wanted, nor other big state commissions wanted. So yes, that would help create some kind of uniformity, but that's really the only way you're going to do it. Otherwise, you go from different jurisdictions. That's why when you talk about drug testing, you'll talk about this, there's some states that do absolutely no drug testing.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. Just covering the sport, there's some states where it's amazing they're able to put on fights with what they do or don't do. Well, let's get into some of that. Let's first talk about how VADA got started. And there's horses involved in the story, so it's pretty interesting. I think most fans will be surprised at how this whole thing got started. So.
Well, when I left the athletic commission in 2005 as a ring physician, one of the reasons I left was because I didn't think it was safe enough. I was concerned that we were not conducting that kind of uniformity to make sure that the fighters that were being licensed should be licensed. There was a whole bunch of other reasons. We had some severe injuries that year, and it was a lot of different things. I felt that the commission itself was, and I was never a commissioner, but that they were not as proactive as they should be. So it was right around the time when Kentucky Derby winner Barbaro got injured, and I think it was, I can't remember if it was at Pimlico, it might have been there, and I started to pay attention to him and what he had gone through, and I started to look what racehorses go through. And believe it or not, thoroughbred racing is under the same kinds of jurisdiction as professional boxing and MMA. It's state controlled. Each jurisdiction has their own commission, political appointees, some that may have knowledge as far as the racing sport and boxing, for example, some that don't. And so I had a very, very good friend who was the attorney for the Association of Boxing Commissions at the time, who also was the attorney for the Maryland Boxing Commission and for the Racing Commission. So I went out and spent several days with him. I actually went to where Barbaro was born and taken care of, and talked with the people in the hospital that were taking care of him at that time because he was still alive. And I started to see how racing vets, the doctors that work, or the veterinarians that work with racehorses operated, how they would assess the racehorses before they would race, and the drug testing. And the drug testing was so much more extensive in thoroughbred racing than it ever had been in boxing and MMA.
I just have to repeat that. The drug testing in horse racing was more thorough than what was happening in boxing. That's crazy to me.
Yeah. And obviously for the jockeys as well that had to make weight, but I was paying more attention to the horses then because I was interested in that. And look, they have a ton of other problems, and racing itself still has a huge drug problem. But the times horse athletes were tested was a lot more frequently. I can say that even in dressage, that what Dr. Silva and I are involved in as far as the type of horseback riding, you go to a competition and there's a lot more drug testing that goes on than in boxing. And, yes, it's important, and I agree with that. I think there should be more testing for the horses, but how sad that our human athletes were not being treated with the same respect.